All right, this is a first video in a series of video about resolving circular references and trying to make it easier. Haida suggested this, and it's a wonderful idea, but I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to try to make a template. Now, I looked at a template. I'm going to just say it was from an accounting firm. That's enough. What a piece of crap. You know, they try to do everything, and they make long formulas, and it's not transparent. It's just a disaster. But, you know, I'm going to try to put as much as I can and make a flexible template. Now, if you don't understand the structure and the principles of this, it's not worth anything. Trying to just take somebody else's stuff and plug it in is a disaster. So I'm going to make it, and then I'm going to make a series of videos. The first one's just going to use only equity, or at least have no interest during construction, or fees during construction, or DSRA accounts, or anything else. It's just going to be a funding issue, but there's going to be a little circular reference because I'll put a development fee that's a percentage of the project cost, and then the project cost goes up, so the development fee goes up. You could probably solve this one, I'm sure you could, with algebra, but there are going to be a whole lot of other things, so we'll leave it in. And I'm going to show you, when I work through these videos, some common problems. And I'm going to try not to swear too much, I promise. I won't do this. So this is just going to be the first video. It might take me months to kind of get this finished. I hope I really do finish it. All right, and then I made a relatively simple operating model with some dates. I'm not going to go through the dates. So we have a start of the development, a 10-month development period. We could make it much longer. So here's the 10 months, and then I put a long construction period in. So by the time you get to about period 55 or something, we can... we're switching to operation, and then we switch to 6-month periods, and it's all kind of simple. And then we have an operating period that we can change. Some CapEx, I put a little bit of a normal distribution in around the CapEx to just make it a little different. I made sure that we have some growth in our EBITDA. And, oh, this still showed up as blue, so I better press Control-Alt-C. I might do a little bit of this. Maybe we'll try a different color and keep off the standard formatting. I wonder if I'll change that eventually. Okay, so there's our starting point. Now let's get into the financing. Now I said, okay, well, development fee, I call that as a part of kind of financing. But that's a percentage of the project cost. So if the cost goes up, the fee goes up, and we have a circular reference. I said we have some senior debt that's 60% of the total project cost, but then the senior debt itself, let's make it 55%, is senior debt 1, and 45 is senior debt 2. So I'm trying to make a template that has a lot of stuff in it. And I'll gradually get a little more advanced as we work through it. And I said there's some mezzanine debt and some equity. Now this is the subject of the video. I could put 70% up front or 100% up front. Heidi showed me this. It's such a good idea. Or 20% up front, and then that means that we don't have to have two different methods, or 0%. That means we're just pro rata. Or 100% means we're all equity up front. Or 55, let's put 45%. So, and then we have some debt service reserve account that I put as an aggregate. Perhaps you could say, well, associated with each debt, but I didn't do that for now. All right, and then we have some, I said the first senior debt is 55% of the senior debt number one is 55% of the senior debt, but that means it's 33% of the total capital, and I put a DSCR in, which is going to be tricky later on, then an interest rate, an upfront fee, a commitment fee, political risk insurance, a tenor, whether we capitalize it or not, and even a bullet repayment. So, and then we have a senior debt 2 that has similar things. I didn't put a bullet repayment, and I put 0 in for the PRI, and finally a third debt, which is some mezzanine debt. And then I worked through, and I'm not going to work through all of this because it's kind of boring, just some EBITDA, and the EBITDA happens during the construction period, and I guess I changed I should make the standard deviation lower. I tried to insert one of these little things. I didn't do it really well, but it shows you that I used a normal distribution. You can look at this, and then we have a very high project IRR. So maybe I better switch this down because that's a kind of ridiculous IRR. So let's put 100 here. Okay. And then we have, what did I put for the interest rates here? I just put a standard interest rate in here. Later we'll put a commitment fee and all that. I mean a credit spread, and okay, a little bit higher on this one, a little bit higher on the sub-debt, and then there's our IRR. Okay, and then what we're going to do as usual is size the debt first, then see how the debt is funded period by period. Down here, senior 1, senior 2, senior 3, and then after that we'll put in some debt repayment and some interest, and finally we'll go through a cash flow waterfall and see if we need some cash sweeps or covenants and all that stuff. So those are my suggested 5 components of the debt. All right, and let me just go through how this equity works. Now watch this. You don't have to watch this. I put the sources and uses here, and this is our I hope it's, this should just be the 33% debt here, and then the next debt, I hope, was the second debt, which was 27% of the aggregate capital structure, and then 15%, and the remainder is equity. But then we say, okay, but out of this equity that's 25%, 118 or 45 is going to be funded up front, and the remaining, this 144, is going to be funded later on. That's 15% of the capital structure, and that means that after you fund this one, the amount that you have to fund with the rest of it, debt and equity, after the upfront is made, is this 931. That's important because that's going to be part of the circular reference thing. Excuse me. I shouldn't be drinking wine while I do this, but I am. All right, and then now, I said I put a little financial close switch in here, and I said we're going to pay our development fee at the financial close. I have a very strong negative feeling to put a whole page of switches in and then have to refer back to the page of switches. God, does that make it not transparent? I used to do it. What a horrible thing that was. Okay, so we have a regular old construction that, and this one I moved all the development costs up here. So we're going to fund this with equity and debt. All right, and then I said, okay, well, let's find the total amount of the upfront funding. This is just the upfront funding, and do our standard take the opening balance away from this and see how much is left over. So once you start funding this, okay, you have to fund all this with equity, and then you have whatever is left over here, and this is the minimum of the total funding uses, and try to make it transparent, and the remaining equity. So that's what's left over. And then there's a little bit of a trick, because for the remainder, we're going to just compute how much, what's the percentage of the remainder that's funded with senior and mezzanine. Now you could, I suppose you could have these, the same sort of ratios, and put a different kind of funding method, but I just said, okay, it's pro rata after that. So just to show you how this would work is, you know, if you, it's a brilliant idea to do it this way, I think, is you put the upfront equity in as a zero, okay, and then we remember kind of what the ratios are. So we put up here, we have zero equity, so we have 25, 33, and all of that. And then we see, okay, well, we're just going to fund the rest of all of this with 25, 33, and then 25. So then we're just funding it purely on a pro rata basis. Okay, and if we put the funding of equity up front, I'm getting a little bit nervous, I should admit this, because I don't want to make this video too long, but I can see it's going to be a little bit of a long one. If I make this 100%, then we go and we have nothing funded up front, and these things are the debt, which is from the sources and uses, divided by the remaining funding afterwards. So what happens here is we fund it all with we fund it all with equity, and then we switch to all debt later on. So that's a nice part of the flexible, F-A-S-T, flexible. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just make one little adjustment, and I'm going to say, okay, well, let's just take and get all the development fees, because the development fees are part of the project cost. So we just put that in, and here we have it, a circular reference. All right, and now I'm going to talk about using a user-defined function to solve this circular reference. Okay, so now what I have done is I have started this template for you, whatever, something, and I pressed alternate F8 to get a list of our macros, and it just has a subroutine first, and I always start with option base 1. Okay, so we start our arrays, counting our arrays at number 1. And then I try to put comments. When defining a UDF, use this variant thing at the end. Now what that means is that the output, you can put a whole bunch of outputs in, which is going to be one of our principles, to put a whole lot of outputs so we can check things as we go along. Now here's the problem. When you add up all of these characters, I hope I haven't exceeded it already, this cannot exceed 128 characters. I hate that. Why did they do that? Okay, it's one of these old Microsoft things. I used to have to, you'd be amazed what I used to have to do in the 80s. Then, here was my thing. If you don't want det 3, you can delete it. I believe you could probably delete it and even leave some of the equations in there. But we're going to try to structure this really carefully. There's a philosophy that I don't know what the right answer is. Should we put as much in here as possible and let you delete it, or a little bit and let you add it? Well, I think I'm going to try to put more in. And I know we're going to need a construction switch. And when I put A, I mean array variable. This is defining what's an array variable and what's a scalar variable that doesn't have an A in it. I suppose this should have a big A. That's going to be a big deal. You know, these ones, we won't have an array variable. Now, I put the interest rate in for debt number 1, debt number 2, and debt number 3 as an array. Right now, we won't put it in as an array. Now, this is a tricky thing. Whether the inputs are arrays or not arrays depends on how you read them. And we're going to try to read in an entire line because it will take forever. With this many variables, the last thing you want to do is to start putting F4s in and start just, you want to click on an entire line because there's so many variables to input. Except when it's a, so when it's an array, you will look at a whole line. And then this is the output. And this is the row here, and then this is the column. And I say this is structured as a row and a column. And we could put 40 different rows in. Eventually, if we want to put more than 40, that's so easy. I mean, in the old days, these putting 1,000 you'd run out of memory and all this stuff because of the horrible Microsoft. They don't do that anymore. It's easy. You have enough space. And then every time we're going to define an array, and every time we're going to print something out, this means funding per period. And I think that's the first output. What we want to do is all of this thing that caused the circular reference down here, this is this funding that then is used to figure out the upfront equity and all that. That's what causes the circular reference. Well, we'll put the right here, we'll call it a fixed funding. Okay, in fact, I'm going to call this a fixed funding. And then we'll put a computed funding. It seems to be just like a old-fashioned circular copy-paste thing, almost. It really does, here. Okay, now, what we're Shift-Control-R, what this thing will now do, and then we can even put a difference. Okay, and that's going to be the first output, this thing minus this. Now this fixed funding, which is going to come from the function, really. UDF, so I don't have to put function in, do I? Okay, and I'm going to put it down here. And we're going to make a list. It could be 40 lines long down here. And we're going to start this whole thing right here. So we're just going to make a kind of array thing here and go down and across. Now when we do that, excuse me, there's my blue arrows. Okay, good. I'm not afraid of blue arrows anymore. And then we have IDC per period. I try to, defining these. Now some people say, you should define every single variable, and then if we make a mistake and spell it wrong, it's going to give us a dreaded value. The dreaded value. And I'm going to try to explain how to look for the dreaded value. It's almost as bad as the dreaded blue line. It's almost worse because sometimes it's hard to find exactly where you made the mistake. Okay? And then what we need to do is initialize the output variables, because I can't spell it, because otherwise you will get an NA, so all of these up here, it says outputs. We're going to go through and zero all of those out. Okay, so if we don't have anything defined later on, it'll just be zeros. It won't be NA. And then the next thing you do is take all those switches that are in the model, all these wonderful switches up here. I've got a circular reference, I'm kind of afraid of it. All these switches, and we need these switches to define what happens during the development period, the construction period, and all of that. And I think we need to really start with the development period if you've got that in the model. So that's what we do, and then we go through, and this is kind of the template. You're always going to have some kind of switches. And I said if the construction switch is 1, and I better put true here, because I use true. Now, you could use true and 1 and 0. I think probably more people use 1 and 0 than true and false. I think almost everybody does, but I'm making this true. Sorry about that. So you're going to have to change it to 1 and 0 if you... if you use this template, okay? And I'm going to have to see if did I miss some of it here? So this was true, and this is true and false. This is true, true and false. Now we're on the operation, and the operation is true, and this is true, and then false, okay? So it doesn't work, unfortunately, automatically. Now, once you have this defined, the next thing is the iteration loop. And it's kind of like a circular copy and paste. We go around until the cost of the project. I'm going to call this project. Now, I can do this because I didn't put a... explicit thing, and you could put the option explicit. That means you have to define each variable, and if you made a spelling mistake like I just did, it would tell you. And maybe that's something you should do, but I don't, because I'm lazy. And it might be like Napoleon, trying dress me slowly because I'm in a hurry, so I maybe shouldn't be lazy about this, but whatever, I am. Okay? And then we say, well, we're going to remember what the last project cost is, and when the last project cost that we went around and computed equals the current project cost, then you converge. That's the difference up here. Okay? And we start with kind of a... Now, when you go around, you were going to recompute the project cost, okay? So, right here, let me see. The first project cost was 9,999. Okay? And then now, what we really need to do is... Well, let me take you through this. So then we'll put some debt balances in. And I'm going to start with a success fee is equal to 0, and then I'm going to say the success fee percent. And I think I spelled it wrong. No. This was called the development percent. See, you've got to be completely consistent. And I could say that I made that mistake on purpose, but that would be a lie. So this was the development percent. So each of these have to be defined, and that's defined as the total amount of our project cost. I'm just going to put this times the project cost. Well, no, I don't want to. Yes, I'm going to have a little bit of a different philosophy here. I don't think I should. I didn't have to delete this. I think I could have started here, because we're going to redefine it. So we start with some, actually, the first project cost is not defined, so the first project cost will be 0, and we'll have a zero success fee, and then we'll say our funding is the capex between added to the success fee. This is a really big deal. The start construction and end construction, they come from the those columns we defined in the switches. Okay, and then so the capex is the funding, and then we said, well, let's put our initial or upfront. And this is a classic kind of thing, upfront draws on the equity. Now, if I define an array variable, and I'm going to try to, do this, where's the equity? Just a second. I think we need a new variable here. Okay, so I put DIM upfront equity draws. This 1,000 means that you could have 1,000 construction periods. That would be a lot, but maybe you would put one at day by day. It's kind of silly, but it doesn't really cost you anything. Somebody might correct me. Upfront draws equity. And I spelled it wrong. And if you spell it wrong, you're going to get the dreaded hash value. Okay. Then so then we have our upfront equity draws is the remaining upfront equity. Now the remaining upfront equity, we better initialize that. So we take our equity funding, how about our equity amount? Now I have to be careful, is our project cost multiplied by the equity percent. And I think what I'm doing right now is very real. You kind of go backwards. It is equal to 1 minus debt, PCT1 minus debt, PCT2, and these debt amounts, these come hopefully straight from the inputs, and this is why in the model we had to define these debt percentages here. I hope I'm not really going as a percentage of the cost. We had to define all of these. All right, and then, okay. And now once we have this, it's kind of like I'm going back and forth between the model, but I'm not feeling too bad about that. Now we have upfront equity is equal to equity amount times the upfront percent. So I can't remember what I put in there, and it was EQ up percent. It was something relatively EQ up front. Okay, is that what I... EQ up percent. Sorry about that. My memory is really going. Okay, where am I? EQ. Okay. Sorry about this. EQ up percent. Okay, and then Now what we're doing is we're going back to the kind of sources and uses, and we're almost following the same sort of thing that we do in the sources and uses here. And we just computed this equity up front, and then we have our sources net of equity. How about we'll use in the same sort of words? And I hope this is okay. Net upfront equals project cost minus the upfront equity. Okay, and then once we have that, we can do a couple of the other things that we're going to do, which we're going to need these percentages. The senior 1%, and I call this the adjusted percent. Okay, and that's so we're first going to have to compute the senior funding. You notice we're doing all this twice, the senior funding and the sub funding and the senior 2 funding, and we're going to have to take these amounts and divide that by the net, and that's what we're going to use for our pro rata calculation. So you have to, I hope you see that keeping the model really structured is really important, and then you do this. So let me just do one. So senior debt 1 equals project cost times debt debt percent 1, which I did wrong. Just let me pause for a minute. Okay, so excuse me. The net cost, I define the net cost as the project cost minus the upfront equity. And then we've defined debt 1, debt 2, and debt 3, as well as equity. Just like we did in everything should correspond to this. These are the amounts of debt and equity. And then we take away, we divide the debt tranches by the net cost to get this adjusted debt percentage. And that's what is in the financial model down here. So virtually every calculation is just simply being repeated. This, you might say, oh man, why didn't I do it? Copy and paste. It's not that bad, okay? And I'm trying to make it so this is kind of standard. Of course, once you have it once, you can copy it down, and you should be a little bit consistent with your definitions. Then we go around the construction, just like I said before. We get the period funding. Now, eventually, this will include the interest during construction. And then we see, well, our upfront draws of equity are the remaining upfront equity. And the very first remaining upfront equity is the equity amount times this equity upfront percent. And this remaining upfront equity is kind of like an opening balance. And then we take it away later on. And this thing called undrawn equity is redundant, and that's kind of like having an equation that's too long almost. So then we can see how much funding is left, and of the funding left over, that's where we put those different percentages in. And then we can add up all the upfront equity and the draws, and these are all these variables. And you better have defined them as a dimensioned array here. And I'm sure I missed something, and I'm going to show you how to test it. couldn't imagine not having a mistake here. Okay, and then we accumulate the debt balance. Now I'm going to talk about that a lot more when we go through the interest during construction, and I don't know if I really, well, I'll leave that for now, okay? And then I put the debt balance into an array, even though we don't really need to, just for an output variable. And then you're finished, okay? And, you know, here, I'm going around and around and around, and this is really a dangerous thing now. There's one absolutely essential thing you have to do, is save the file before you'd ever run this. But I'm going to put if the count is greater than, let's say, 25, then exit exit function. That's its key, that you have exit function, okay? If it's not, we find out how many iterations, and we should print those out. We'll print those out in a minute. Now, this is the really tricky part, and I think we're going to have to do this again. I'm going to just say the development. If we take we want to start the output, so we want to make a little output here. Perhaps we'll start here. We'll start right at the first thing here. And if we start right at the first here, we want to not put anything in the development period, and we want to only put it in the construction period. Okay? Now, when I went around these counts, you got to be really careful. We want to, so we're going to skip to the development period and put this output 1 will start in the development period, and then it's kind of another separate counter variable. We'll add 1 to the count. So there'll be nothing in the development period, and we'll skip just to the construction period. This is what this whole thing is supposed to be doing. And then if I starts with, I doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. We're just going through the construction period. We're going around the construction period, but we want to fill in zeros in the earlier ones first. And then I'm going to put the CapEx, the IDC, the upfront fees, and all of that. And I didn't put in a key one that we want to put in right now, which is the development fees. So I'm going to have to redo this, and we're going to have to put a little another dimension here, which it doesn't matter if you have a bunch of these, and we put development fees with a period, perhaps 1,000, and then we can put this development fees just below here. I think it's good that I didn't do that one, so you can see how it kind of works. So this is the success fee. I should keep these names a little more consistent, perhaps. Okay. And then did I put development fees, DEV fees P, DEV fees P, and then we go down here and put DEV fees P. Okay, now 5, 6. I'm not going to have you watch this. Now I'm outputting the CapEx, the development fees, the IDC, the upfront fees, the commitment, all of these things in kind of the same order as we put all of the presentation here. So we can kind of look and see what's wrong. This is primarily just to test it out. And I think from bitter experience, I guess you could only, if you wanted, you could only print out the very first one, which is this one. But if you print out all the rest, you can start to test what's really going on. All right, and now I'm going to try it. And if it works, I'll be absolutely shocked. And the other thing you might want to do is you really want to almost copy these titles here. And I think maybe the best way to do this will be just to copy the titles from the sources and from the funding needs thing. Okay, and eventually we'll have to put the capitalized interest in. I didn't put that in. Okay, and you can tell. Oh no, you can tell that I'm afraid to do this. I really am. So remember the rule number 1. Save the file. Okay, and then over here, I guess we could, put in this stuff. Okay, it kind of stopped here. I'll put it here, and then we had the total at the top. We had the total funding needs, I guess. And then somewhere just below there we had these 3 funding amounts, and I put the total funding, total sources, total. I'll call that total uses, and then total sources. So we're repeating. This illustrates how we're repeating the whole model, and you don't have to do this, obviously. So we select the whole area, okay, and go. This time you can go through the construction period, or you can go further, and you put equal, and then the name of this function was circular template, and then you press Shift F3, and you start to just click on this, and I hope that you agree that, just this, we just want the construction period switch. So that's the first one. And then we look at the development period switch. And I hope I have a development period switch. I do that. So you just press Shift Spacebar. And then we need the operating period switch. And if I hope you can see, I'm repeating myself a little bit, that it's a lot easier to do it this way. And then we're putting the construction expenditures that start the whole business. Now I made that adjustment to the development fees. And then if you want, you can put the EBITDA in, because we're going to need that later. And that's an array, so it says EBITDA an array. And then working capital, which I'll just put in a 0 for now. And then we're going to start with the equity upfront percent. Okay. And I'm going to turn the video off while I finish this. Now I'm already at 43 minutes, but this is an important one. Then we get no answer. I input all of these things, all of these variables. Okay, and I get no answer, and that means it's going to give us a bunch of values. And I press OK. Uh-oh, and it said, what did it say? Just a minute. Oh, shoot. Okay, it says duplicate declaration. Did I have a DSRA period here? I can't find it. Uh-oh. Now, something amazing really happened. It's almost sad. I wanted to write when this happened, I had a little problem with the video. So here's what I'm going to show you. Let's pretend that I put 4 as the output instead of 40. And now what I did while in this video that I was recording that didn't show up, then we get values. Oh no, we got these values. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Okay, these are the things you hate. And that was because I put 4 instead of 40, and it tried to look for variables. Down here we have remaining equity. That's by period. And let's say that I put down at the bottom, here when we're putting all these things up, I put remaining equity and I put PER instead of period. Just make one little mistake like this with an array variable. And uh-oh, it just didn't find it, so that's kind of good. That wasn't so bad. All right, and now let's, sorry about this. So once you have this defined, here's what you're going to get used to doing. No. We have to press the F5 or continue, and then, no values, okay? But let's say I, over here, I put the equity balance, and I don't call it an array variable. I call it a scalar variable that has no array on it. And then we put this down here, and it gives you a value. The dreaded values. They're easy to get. And you have to be very, very careful when you do this stuff about understanding what's an array variable and what's a scalar variable. And on those, the program kind of doesn't tell you what to do. Now, the really good news about this whole thing is that up here, now we put a little sources and uses of funds. I have to tell you that it didn't work the first time, and I had to put a whole bunch of other stuff here. But we can see that we're funding with equity first, and then after we're funding with equity, we have a little bit of pro rata. So if I put up here in the inputs the upfront equity percent to be 100%, then then we finance it all with equity until we're finished, and then we finance it all with the debt afterwards. This is Heidi's very nice method and very flexible method. Now, the best news about this whole thing is that it started in the right place. We put these outputs right in the right place. And, you know, when this is why the template, excuse me for the pause, really is supposed to help. We put this development period, and I have to add 1. I should know exactly why I'm adding 1, but whatever. And then if we put the development period in, it starts counting. This start construction is going to be way in the kind of out in these little array variables, but we want to start counting at the development period, because there is where you're going to start making the output array. Getting these in the right place, getting these little things, getting the switches right, and getting it worked out so at least you have a sources and uses of funds statement to start with. That's the big deal. That's one of the real pains and one of the big deals. If you can get it all started right, then you can go step by step and start adding other things in the model. Now, if you look at this one, for example, now, if you look at we also put the debt balances and the equity balances, and if you kind of look at the final equity balance, it was 276 and the final debt balance was 374, and you go up and you look at this, come on. There's I hope this was 364. I said 374 because, as somebody said, I'm a little dyslexic, but a lot maybe. Oh no. I didn't want to go all the way up here. I just wanted to go to the end of the construction period. I should have put a little, that was the end of the operating period, and there's the 364, not 374. And I also output some of the kind of parameters here, and this was just because things went wrong the first time, so you can just, these are all outputting column by column data, but then if you want to output things that are just fixed, like the total equity amount, I put the total project amount, cost, the total, the development percent we had as an input. These you can just put in different rows and columns. Remember, I had up to 40 different rows. And then this is the very end, the last step. Okay, define the output. Okay, and then we finished with the function. This step, I think, is a big deal, putting all the output variables together. And then, so let's go back. So we have step number one is kind of putting the dimension variables and initializing. And then step two is defining start and end columns with the switches. Okay, I can't believe I get so nervous doing these videos. Get nervous about dislikes and all that stuff. And then step number three is I'll just put it for now. Create an iteration loop. Now, I think I don't really have to emphasize this enough, but you need a well laid out and not too complicated, I shouldn't maybe not say that, not too complicated. You need a well structured, FASS for structured, a structured Excel part of the model that then you can replicate. And there were a lot of things to replicate here. And then you need the T, FAST, for transparent, so we can see what's going on with our function. And the A, I suppose, is to make sure we have a little bit of accuracy tests here. We have the sources equal the uses in each period and testing whether the total debt is all working on all that. FAST. And flexible, the model itself has to be flexible. Now, I don't know how to make the function flexible enough, but, we could, up here where we put the equity, upfront equity percent in, we could put that as 0%. And when you put it in as 0%, now you're back to pro rata. You're back to just the old pro rata stuff. And it's kind of funny. I'm almost looking at the function output before we look at anything else, because you have a nice little sources and uses of funds. And now we just have the same thing. We get the same debt and equity balances, but we put them in as a different method. Okay, so that's the key thing, is to get this whole thing started. And once you get this whole thing started, now I'm gonna keep going, adding, the next step is gonna be adding the interest during construction. And I'm gonna try to do that in a transparent and flexible and accurate way. But it hopefully won't be as bad because you got the whole thing started. All right? And that's enough.